We're beginning chapter 22. They're trying to kill the Magic Dutch boys. Halfway through our investigation into the people and organization operating at the Venice airport, our efforts took on a certain urgency. After it became apparent that somebody was trying to kill the Magic Dutch boys, Rudy Deckers and Arnie Krithoff, the targets of our investigation, had also been targeted in ways less benign. Less than 5 months apart, Krithoff and Deckers were involved in separate air accidents. Krithoff in a Cessna on his way supposedly to Cancun, and Deckers in his helicopter on his way to a showdown meeting with his now estranged partner, Wally Hillard. Aviation observers said the crashes could have or should have killed them both. Neither man had any history of air crashes. It was enough to remind some, certainly the conspiracy-minded, of the suspicious deaths of Kennedy assassination witnesses, who no longer had any comment on what they'd seen, because they were no longer with us. Paging Miss Dorothy Killigan. So, even though we'd made some headway in understanding what was going on, and in the process unearthed evidence of a large and ongoing 9/11 cover-up in Florida, it might not even be enough to meet our unstated goal, aiding a successful effort to compel sworn testimony from people assisting the terrorist conspiracy while they were in this country. Because if there was a 9/11 cleanup crew at work in Florida, its activities could instantly make all our efforts unavailing. We were playing beat the clock with the Grim Reaper. Decker's brush with death happened with such inauspicious timing that eyebrows were raised all over Florida. On Friday morning, January 24th, 2003, Rudy and his helicopter splashed down at the mouth of a river, spilling into the Gulf. He had been en route to a showdown over Huffman Aviation with his erstwhile partner, Wally Hillard, with whom he had been publicly feuding. Just a few short months earlier, it had been fellow Magic Dutch boy Arnie Krithoff's turn. Krithoff was one of three men who barely survived the crash of their Twin Beach D-18. I think I added a witch in there that shouldn't have been there. Krithoff was one of three men who barely survived the crash of their Twin Beach D-18. Okay. Which plummeted from 100 feet in the air to a runway at the Venice airport. The men were able to drag themselves out of the mangled fuselage and dash to safety moments before the plane's 300 gallons of fuel exploded in a fireball. It made for a great picture in the next day's Venice Gondolier. When the tumultuous Deckers crashed his helicopter into the Kalushachi, that's what I'm going to say. Kalushachi River. His latest misadventure made the news everywhere from Sarasota to South Africa. The coverage revealed an abiding and continuing public curiosity about him, even in the face of the official blackout. What was most revealing about Decker's crash was that before he took off for what was to be a showdown with Hillard, he had been seriously worried about having an in-flight mishap. Although the flight from Naples, Fort Myers area to Venice takes barely half an hour, Deckers prevailed on another helicopter pilot headed in the same direction, Tony Dungadara, to fly alongside him in an effort as he explained it unconvincingly to stave off boredom. Either Deckers was psychic or he was afraid someone might want him dead. Something clearly was going very wrong for Rudy Deckers even before his chapter began experiencing difficulties. The first sign of trouble to come came when one of the helicopters began pulling away. When his more powerful helicopter surged ahead, pilot Tony Dungadara told the Venice gondolier Deckers seemed remarkably upset. He was calling me on. He was calling me on. He was calling me on. He radio saying, "Oh, there just must be a missing H." He was calling me on the radio saying, slow down," said Dungadara. Then just a couple of minutes later, I heard him say, "I'm going down." Dungadara seemed to be suggesting he'd been recruited to be nearby if something went wrong. He circled back to see what had happened. "Oh shit, I'm going down," Dungadara heard Deckers cry out over the radio. "I thought it was a joke at first," he told the Sarasota Herald-Tribune, but I couldn't hear the motor or any rotor noise. I knew he was in trouble. He was in bad shape and in no condition to swim. He was just hanging onto the craft's skid to stay afloat. The helicopter Heat Deckers was in flipped over and crashed into the Calahoosache River near downtown Fort Myers at 7:25 a.m., reported the January 25, 2003 Miami Herald. Deckers climbed on parts of his helicopter that had not submerged. He then grabbed the landing runners on Dungadara's helicopter and was pulled from the river. Once ashore, Deckers hopped into a nearby swimming pool to warm up, said news accounts. After Dungadara took Deckers to a nearby home, actually somebody's backyard, in a quick drop, he went into the pool to wash off the fuel that was stinging his skin. Startled at the sight of a fully dressed Magic Dutch boy floating in his pool, the homeowner called 911. Strangely, by the time officers arrived, Deckers had left. The sopping wet Deckers braved the 30-degree weather, wandering down the streets in search of help, said the Sarasota paper. Odd. He'd been trying to flag people down to take him to the hospital, he said later, but he had a hard time getting people to believe his story. Because if Deckers was seeking medical attention, he didn't tell the people who owned the oil-slicked pool. He was clearly in a hurry, taking a dip in a pool, then disappearing. Was he worried about compensating the homeowner for the cost of having jet fuel sopped from their swimming pool? He went wandering down the street, soaking wet. Deckers perceived another lucky turn. Rescue crews on their way to the crash scene spied on him and rushed him to Lee Memorial Hospital in Fort Myers, said the Tribune. Deckers was treated and released about 11:30 a.m. By early afternoon, he was apparently feeling well enough to hold business meetings at Huffman Aviation. Rudy Decker's unexplained helicopter crash came while he was on his way to a Venice meeting to sign papers relinquishing control of Terror Flight School, Huffman Aviation to Wally Hillard. Two simultaneous events, the crash and being forced out of business by his partner, weren't linked by law enforcement. But the strange timing added another bizarre twist to the saga of the 46-year-old Dutch national, who had already achieved international notoriety. When we checked both men's FAA records for previous crashes, they hadn't shown any. But the search proved fruitful anyway. Records obtained from the Naples Airport Authority reveal that Rudy Deckers had received numerous citations for negligence non-payments of bills, leaving a helicopter running with no one at the controls, numerous noise complaints, and a lot of suspicious low flying well below safe limits, but no previous plane crashes. Deckers was in the middle of a fairly rough patch. In the space of a little more than a week, he learned he would be arrested on felony fraud by the state attorney's office, crashed his helicopter into the Calahoosache River, and signed over the flight school that gave him his 15 minutes of fame. Told he was about to be arrested for fraud, Deckers told the Venice gondolier. Wow, I'm surprised. After overcoming his incredulity, however, he called the charge political, heaping some thinly veiled scorn on the man prosecuting him, State's Attorney Jonathan Green, for not knowing that everything had been taken care of already. We weren't drawing the paperwork as we speak that resolves the deal, Deckers told reporters defiantly. We have a deal. We have a deal. We know about it. Everybody knows about it except the state attorney. He said, we don't have problems anymore. Wally Hillard, present at the contract signing the afternoon of Rudy's crash, was agreeable to disseminating the suit, confirmed Jim Beach, director of operations for Triple Diamond Jet Center, the new owners of Huffman Aviation. Not so fast, said State Attorney Jonathan Green. Wally Hillard called me and asked for a waiver of prosecution, he told us. But I told him that nothing had changed on our end. We're going forward with the charges. The charges would keep Deckers in the U.S. for a year, preserving the hope that investigators will have the opportunity to question him. We asked about Rudy's rap sheet. We wanted to know since our first day in Venice, when we were told his police file had been confiscated by the FBI. State's Attorney Green indicated Decker's prior record included a number of blemishes, like owing $3 million in the Netherlands, for example, the result of the same criminal activity he'd just been charged with again, pledging assets he didn't own to secure loans he didn't plan to repay. A Dutch court had adjudged him guilty of acting in a manifestly improper fashion, according to documents we had translated. They said his manifest failure to properly manage the company was an important cause of bankruptcy of an Netherlands-based company Deckers had stripped of its assets before fleeing to the U.S. Rudy Deckers was a repeat offender. Now, not just a fraudster, but a professional fraudster. Many people with his history are assumed to be working with organized crime. When he completed the sale of Huffman, Deckers expected his problems to go away. He'd indicated his legal woes would end when Hillard dropped his lawsuit, an action he believed would trigger the dismissal of the criminal fraud charge, which concerned a $200,000 loan from a crony of Hillard's in Wisconsin, secured with a mortgage on a property in the name of a company which didn't own the property being used as security. This must be what people mean when they say, nice work if you can get it. Yet despite settling his lawsuit with now former partner Hillard, his woes appeared to be just beginning. Now someone in the government was saying, wait a minute, in the 2 years since the 9/11 disaster, it was the first time officials had taken action that wasn't designed to pass over inconvenient details of the 9/11 attack. The second Magic Dutch boy, Arnie Kuritov, kept a much lower profile. It was somewhat surprising to discover that his plane crash was even more life-threatening than Decker's. Arnie and two others barely survived the crash of their private plane on Wednesday, June 26th, 2002, when it nosedived to the earth after a troubled takeoff from the Venice airport. From over 100 feet in the air, the plane plunged onto the runway of the Venice airport, and subsequent events left aviation observers wondering if Kruithoff's near brush with death was an accident or something more sinister. On board, along with co-pilot Kruithoff, were the pilot Glenn Goodman and a passenger John Mills. The men told investigators they were on their way for a pleasure trip to Cancun. They were shaken up, but essentially without injuries, according to a Venice police spokesman, who also said they were really lucky to walk away from this. Coming just months after Rudy Decker's helicopter crash, Kruithoff's plunge had observers wondering out loud if the crash was just an accident. Local observers were skeptical. While mechanical failure was believed to be responsible, there were suspicions the plane had been sabotaged. Citing a commonly used method of provoking plane crashes, one wag at the airport asked, "Did they check the fuel tanks for rubber balloons?" And that was before the plane's wreckage was towed out of the airport and destroyed in an unseemly and possibly criminal haste, before investigators had even determined the cause of the crash. If someone were attempting to ensure Kruithoff's ultimate silence in front of congressional investigators, a plane crash historically would be the way to go. Did someone want the Magic Dutch boys dead? Glenn Goodman's plane was uninsured when it went down, supposedly on the way to Cancun, ferrying parts for another plane that had broken down there. But one of the men, John Mills, was wearing his mechanic's coveralls in the cockpit of a plane flying to Mexico in his mechanic's coveralls in the cockpit of a plane flying to Mexico in sweltering late June. It was like flying to Hawaii wearing a three-piece suit, someone told us. Then, too, going to Cancun to spend a weekend in July is like taking a 3-day vacation in February in Green Bay, Wisconsin. We could hear in our head the slow drawl of our friend the Southern lawman, who sometimes spoke so slow he made 2 words out of one, when he says it's untidy. You could drive a truck between un and tidy. There were suspicious irregularities in the official investigation into Kruithoff's plane crash that observers at the airport said had never before happened. Without any finding on the cause of the crash, before investigators were even able to get a look at the downed plane, the wreckage was gone. Things like that weren't supposed to happen. Even though the FAA hadn't yet determined the cause for the crash, said one shocked observer, the plane was almost immediately dragged off to be compacted. He looked stunned. That's not just irregular, that's highly irregular. We're all kind of wondering just what the hell's going on. Though both Deckers and Kruithoff got a free ride from the national press, they didn't get one from their aviation peers. In the community of aviation professionals in Southwest Florida, there was a cloud of suspicion hanging over them already, even before their near disasters. One concern we heard voiced was that the 2 schools had catered almost exclusively to international students. Deckers told reporters he'd trained more than 800 foreign students during just the past 2 years. and Venice residents said the city's other flight school, Florida Flight Training, had numerous international students as well. Speculation about Kruithof centered on his relationship with Rudy Deckers, and also to another partner, Pascal Schreier. A German national living in Munich, Schreier and Kruithof had a co-venture called Aviation Aspirations. According to its literature, the company provided financial assistance and a mentor program. About their mentor program, the company's literature said, the help is both financial and practical. We now provide one-to-one practical assistance from experienced professional pilots, our mentors, whom we have established throughout the world. Mentor sounded a lot to us like handler. Were we being too cynical? French newspaper Le Monde had reported that Osama bin Laden's brother, Yeslam, sent student pilots to Venice for training. Nothing more about this mechanism has surfaced. Was Aviation Aspirations the vehicle that had been used to insert Yeslam bin Laden's pilot into Venice flight schools? Schreier's job was recruiting flight students from his Munich base. He had recruited in Hamburg. Had he recruited in Hamburg? We didn't know. We did know that the company's motto was better training because we care. Who was Pascal Schreier and why did he care? Pascal Schreier has an inferiority complex, Venice Airport insider Max Berg told us. He's 6'2", blonde, good-looking, German, and you could see it in him. Rudy and Arnie, too. We didn't get to meet him, but we learned a few interesting tidbits to share. Pascal Schreier is married to a lady who took over the 135 school at Port Charlotte, said one aviation source. We checked it out. It was true. Small world. Pascal's wife, Sandra K. Hamoda, who was a half French and half Tunisian, now owned the flight school in Punta Gorda, once known as Professional Aviation, the one which went bankrupt in February 2001. While Mohomed Atta and all those Tunisians were there, now it appeared that they'd kept the school in the family. Later we learned that the new owners of Huffman Aviation were from the latest flight school in the Netherlands, which used to train up in Lakeland, Florida. It was near Rotterdam, the city from which Arnie Kruithof hailed. Pascal Schreier was also apparently involved with Wally and Rudy's failed aviation ventures. The true name of their flop airline, which flew as Florida Air, was Sunrise Aviation, and Pascal Schreier owned a company called Florida Sunrise, with an address at Venice Airport. It was too close for coincidence. Kruithof's plane crash also threw a spotlight on the pilot of the downed plane, Glenn Goodman. The pilot at the controls of the downed Beech D-18. Goodman and Kruithof were partners in Arnie's flight school at the Venice airport, just like Rudy and Wally were in theirs. Goodman received praise for controlling the crash and keeping the plane from flipping end over end down the runway. Some cited his skillful flying for 3 men still being alive. There we go. Who is Glenn Goodman? Goodman, we learned, is the scion of the Budweiser distributor family in nearby Tampa. His family also owns the Sarasota Yacht Club, which attests to a certain level of attainment. Glenn, however, lived on the floor of a cabin out at Eagles Point Landing, we were told. We asked someone who knew him to describe him. Was Goodman eccentric? Glenn Goodman had a gold mine in the Caribbean and owns a sailboat he sometimes lives on at Marathon Key, said the source. He looks like Howard Hughes with a ponytail. We took that for a yes. Kruithoff and Goodman formed Florida Flight Maintenance in July of 2000, just as Mohomed Atta and Marwan began training at the Venice airport. Goodman also owned a DC-3 that sat at the Venice airport for 2 years before being donated to an air museum in July 2000, called the Florida Military Aviation Museum. This was a major red flag. Donating planes and then getting them back from air museums is a ruse which has been used to provide planes over the years to rich and colorful crop of elite deviants with international connections. A military flight museum was the same venue used by the CIA in the past to liberate military planes and helicopters in various sordid paramilitary schemes. It was being used right next door in Charlotte County, we remembered, to reassign 23 helicopters to new billets. Also troubling was the fact that Goodman's company was closed involuntarily by the state of Florida on September 21st, 2001. Was its closure 9/11 related? Known as N979 Inc., the company was named for the N number of the business's sole asset, the aging DC-3, because the company never filed an annual report. Much about it remains a mystery. When we ran the plane's registration, or N number, we discovered that the plane's colorful history had included long stints in exotic locations. It spent quite a bit of time, for example, back in the 80s in Manuel Noriega's Panama. The DC-3 could be traced back to an infamous South Florida Customs airplane boneyard, where planes with checkered pasts sit in a fenced storage yard, like the sister ship of the famous C-123 shot down over Nicaragua in 1986 with Eugene Hassenfuss aboard. Probably just a coincidence. We heard a funny, only in Florida anecdote about another proud local owner of a DC-3, a man reputed to be in the import-export business and apparently as colorful as Goodman's impersonation of Howard Hughes with a ponytail. Anytime I need cash, said this aviator, I go out in the backyard and dig up a mason jar. The most interesting thing we heard about Glenn Goodman was that the DEA, surprisingly active at this tiny Venice airport, had asked a local confidential informant of theirs to follow him around. Maybe the aborted Cancun trip had something to do with it. Maybe even more incredible was that the DEA informant, being asked to keep an eye on a guy walking around looking like Howard Hughes with a ponytail, was involved in other events in our story as well, and had his own colorful history. He set up people in Fort Lauderdale and was given some of their toys, said an airport insider. He rolled on the Whittingtons. The Whittingtons? Those Whittingtons? We were momentarily speechless. We thought, wow, who knew? Small world. When we finally interviewed Wally Hillard, it came after we'd dropped into his offices unannounced. It got us an audience. We began by asking him to explain the numbers of Arab students marching across the tarmac at his flight schools. I'm sorry, what you're saying is grossly untrue, Hillard stated, angrily denying reports about the number of suspected terrorists who had flocked his two Deckers-run flight schools. I believe that there were 2 Arab students, not 22, only 2, Hillard told us, dismissive and emphatic. There were 2, period, 2 total. If we were speaking of Deckers, we'd say he was lying, but Mr. Hillard, as an elder, deserves a touch more respect, we figure. Hillard wasn't lying, he was just mistaken. In point of fact, the revelation of an additional 4 terrorist suspects in Chapter 14 had brought just the already known total of 9/11 cadre terrorists enrolled at flight schools owned by Dutch nationals Rudy Deckers and Arnie Kruithoff to 8. Rudy Decker's toll alone was 5 and counting. What made Deckers more than a run-of-the-mill con man and quick-fading historical footnote is something which remains unacknowledged except obliquely by U.S. officials. When the Hamburg cadre made their faithful leap across the Atlantic, it was Rudy Deckers assigning them bunks on the left side of the big pond. Deckers sat at the critical nexus where the terrorist conspiracy met the United States of America. If Deckers had been lying while claiming to be an innocent business owner victimized by wily terrorists, an action we've documented him taking with an awe-inspiring regularity, the conclusion is unavoidable that Mohomed Atta didn't just happen to stumble onto Venice, Florida. And if Atta didn't stumble on Venice, then we have stumbled onto the fabled global network and flatly contradicted the FBI's scenario that the terrorists received no outside help while they were in the U.S., a position they have held tenaciously during the 2 years since the disaster. Even though it's wrong, the position has allowed the Bureau to discourage speculation about the anomalies visible in the terrorists' workplace. In their milieu, the FBI probably figures, and rightly, that when you're playing for time, every little bit helps. Within spitting distance of communities of retired CIA agents, large numbers of Middle Eastern men were enrolled as students at flight schools operated by people reeking with shady and clandestine connections. In the indifferently motivated September 11th investigations, so fat that one really burning question hasn't even come up. What's been going on in Florida? When Rudy Deckers turned himself in to be arrested on the fraud charge, local observers said they were disappointed that there hadn't been a perp walk. It would have been, all in all, small satisfaction. But then, small satisfaction is better than none. And that's it for Chapter 22. Chapter 23, Anatomy of a Cover-Up, tomorrow.